which I did too. So anyway, I went to work the next morning and got to work, and somebody in the back, the phone rang, and they hollered, "Fudge, it's for you." And I went back and picked up the phone. It was Michael Cabinets in Houston. He said, "The board had breakfast this morning, and we've decided the Lord wants us to offer you the job. Do you have any sense of what He wants you to do?" Well, as it happened, isn't it funny how coincidences happen so often when you're praying about things? That's not a coincidence, is it? As it happened, that morning I was reading a little devotional book by Keith Miller called Habitation of Dragons. And that morning, 2 minutes before the telephone rang, I'd finished reading a devotional that ended by saying, and had a little prayer for the day, and the prayer said, "Dear Lord, let me know that today I am free to go or to stay. Let me do what seems best for me and my family." And then the phone rang, and there was these guys offering the job. So we moved to Houston in 1982. I started the Good newspaper. One day the publisher took me to lunch, and he said, "Did you ever wonder why we hired you instead of 75 other people who wanted this job?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'd be interested to know that." And he said, "Well, it's because you had typesetting experience, and we thought that might come in handy someday." So this thing that I looked down on turned out to be God's stepping stone to something else. I was the publisher, I was the editor of that paper, interdenominational Christian newspaper, for the next 2.5 years until the Houston economy crashed, when the oil business went way down in 1985, and I had to do something else. Next slide, please. Next slide. I got to tell this quick story. The church that we joined in Houston, Bering Drive Church of Christ, these folks had asked me to serve as an elder, and I was only 38 years old. And I'm thinking, I'm too young to be an elder. So I went to this 70-year-old elder and asked him what he thought. And he said, "Well, you're being humble about it, but if the brothers and sisters think that you should be, perhaps they see something that you don't. And if they ask you to, I think you should serve." So I agreed to, and we had an ordination service on the coming Sunday, in which the present elders would lay on hands and pray and ordain the new elders. There were 2 of us who were to be ordained. Maybe Tuesday night of that week, I got a phone call from a dear friend in Arlington, Texas, near Dallas, named Kerry McDaniel, who I'd gone to Florida Christian College with. Kerry was at this time pastor of a non-denominational charismatic church in Arlington, Texas, called Mid-Cities Chapel. And he said to me, "There's a brother going to be here ministering this weekend who I believe has a gift of prophecy. And I wish you would come up and meet him and listen to him." Well, I was mentally ready for that. I believed that God spoke to people when He wanted to, but I'd never seen it happen in a way that I thought was credible. Most of what I'd seen was on television, and I still haven't seen a whole lot on television that I would recommend to folks on some of these things. But at any rate, Kerry I trusted. So I flew up there on Thursday to go to their meeting on Thursday night. I should tell you that 2 things were on my heart besides being an ordained elder next Sunday. In addition to that, I still had a concern for these brothers and sisters in the Barn Church who, when we moved to Texas, had disbanded and scattered all different directions. And I also had a great concern because in some earlier years, 15 years earlier, I had written a little book called Speaking in Tongues, in which I argued that God didn't give the gift of tongues, and I told all kinds of reasons why this was a terrible, bad thing and nobody ought to have anything to do with it. Well, I had since changed my mind about that, and I thought, in fact, I changed my mind so forcefully and suddenly that I felt like the Lord wanted me to put the last 2,600 copies of the booklet in a dumpster, which I did. And I often wondered, well, wouldn't it have been nicer if the Lord let somebody buy them first and then change my mind? But that was on my mind also because I'd taught some things I didn't think were true any longer. So I go to Dallas, show up for the meeting that night. Brother Roycroft, who was going to be the preacher, was driving down from Canada, and he didn't show up when the meeting started. So we kept singing and singing and singing. Finally, he comes in about 30, 40 minutes late. His car had broken down in Oklahoma. And he just immediately walked to the podium and began preaching a short sermon from the life of Joseph. When he finished that, he just started talking to people. He didn't say he was a prophet. He didn't use the word prophecy. He just talked to people. He'd say, "The brother in the red shirt, The Lord would say to you that you have a lot of stress in your life and you don't know who you should listen to. Many people are trying to advise you, but the Lord has given you advisors and the elders of your church, and you should go to them. They're shepherds who look out for your soul, and they're trustworthy, etc., etc. Sister in the blue blouse, the Lord will say to you, this is happening in your life, and so on. I'm sure you all have seen this happen. Two of the people who were there that night were the Church of Christ preacher and his wife from the church that this Mid-Cities church had started out from. And they were on friendly terms with each other. And this minister and his wife were there from the Church of Christ. And he spoke to both of them. I had been in their home many times through the years. I knew them very well. I didn't know anybody else there except Kerry and his wife. But I knew these two. And when he spoke to them, he spoke so intimately about their lives that I was just overwhelmed. And I knew he knew something that people didn't normally know except God tells them. And they were both sitting there just weeping because they were so touched by it as well. Then suddenly, Bill Roycroft just stopped talking and went and sat down. And I got up and went immediately to Kerry, the pastor, and said, why did he turn off the faucet before everybody got watered? And Kerry said, well, maybe he's got some more. So he went over and asked him, did he have anything else to say? And he motioned 2 or 3 of us into a classroom. There was me. There was a couple who were leaving the next day for a Wycliffe Bible translator service. And there was a young student from Nigeria who was a college exchange student in Arlington, University of North Texas. And he spoke to each of them, and he spoke to me. And when he spoke to me, he said something like this. He said, as you are about to enter a new area of ministry, the Lord has gone before you and prepared the way. And the Lord has given you a listening heart. Because the people you're going to serve don't need to hear more words. They've heard so many words, their hearts are like a well-trodden path. But God has given you a listening heart, and He will be with you in this new ministry. He didn't know I was about to be ordained an elder. Then he said, the Lord would say to you that you're concerned about the people you've left behind, but the Lord's taking care of them, and they're His people, and et cetera, they're in good hands as well. Then he said, you're concerned because in the past you've taught things that you later learned were not true. But the Lord would say to you that you did it in good conscience, and when you learn better, you change your teaching, and He's proud of that. And basically, He's pleased with you, and it's okay. So I was just overwhelmed with that. And they gave me a little cassette tape with this. I took it home that night, flew back to Houston, took it home. My dear wife at that time did not have the enthusiasm, let's say, for these things that I did. And in fact, there was a really sore spot in our marriage when I would bring up these kinds of subjects. Because she was a very godly woman, but she just didn't believe that God did these kinds of things and didn't think I should believe He did either. So anyway, next morning I went to work at the newspaper, and I just said to her, the tape that the man gave me last night is on the kitchen table if you ever decide you want to listen to it. Came home from work that night. And she didn't say anything, and I didn't say anything. We ate supper, and she didn't say anything. And I thought, I got to say something. So I just said, did you ever get a chance to listen to that tape? And she said, yes. And I said, what did you think about it? And she said, I cried all the way through it. He knew everything about you. And ever since then, we've been totally of one accord on this subject. But that was just, I'm just tossing out some examples of some of the different ways God blessed us and led us. And all of that, in my mind, is part of this bigger story of being abandoned, and of being opposed, and of being denounced, and losing everything that we thought was solid. And it was like God was saying, I'm going to take away everything that you've been trusting in and everything that you've been looking at and depending on and thinking was important, till you know there's nothing left but me and you. And when you know where your strength really comes from, then I'm going to start blessing you again. And so He reduced us to nothing, and He took away all our securities and all our props. And when we were flat on the ground, which many times was the way I literally was praying in the backyard, then He began to bless us and restore us and give us things back again. And it's just continued and continued and continued. And all I can do is praise His name for it. Next slide, please. One day, the good newspaper looked like it was going to have to close because of the economy going down and their advertising disappearing.